Hello? Oh, yeah. Ooh. Josh Luber, CEO of StockX. Sneaker King. The truck will be parked out front pretty soon. Anybody want to like cozy on in? Let's be family. There's seats and free books.
Maybe people are just hanging out like way back there. I don't know what they're doing.
Come on down.
So while they're moving, actually here, like, am I talking to this right? So like literally the most important question from that is, was that guy wearing a Lego bow tie?
He was wearing a Lego bow tie. He's like notoriously known for wearing Lego bow ties.
So I have a Lego money clip and I have Lego cufflinks, but no one's ever seen me wear a French cuff shirt, so that doesn't happen. But I have a Lego thing, so I know this is Lego bow tie.
This is Legoland. This is Legoland South.
Yeah.
We'll get a Lego hat.
So I'm going to talk to Chris about the book, but I don't know, do you want to give further context for the video before we get into the book and go through that?
Nope. No. No. There's a walkout. I've been hosting this show for the last 4.5 years called Innovation Crush. It is a podcast. It's 200 plus interviews with people like Nolan, or like Brent. Brent is actually the son of Nolan Bushnell, who created Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. So the godfather of the video game industry, and he's kind of taken that baton and like done what you saw there. That's just like a sliver of what's possible. But it's just really this exploration of innovation, these human stories. Even that episode was really fun because it was a father-son dynamic, and I got to ask them like, what's a trait that you admire in one versus the other, and a skill you wish you had that someone else didn't have, or between the father and son, like even handing down the generational know-how to become a mindful innovator.
A lot of times you see interviews, and the interviewer, the first thing they say is like, welcome my good friend, blah, 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 I've known forever. Chris and I just met. So we don't have as much of that, so there's a little bit of this learning.
I told everybody we were friends.
Yeah, well, no, we're definitely friends. But a little bit of this is me learning at the same time as they are. But so I thought it was a podcast. So the video is...
The video is where we're just starting to do more like visual representation, right? It's one thing to talk about these worlds and these spaces, like I've interviewed the CEO of Virgin Galactic, right? It's one thing to talk about it in a studio setting. It's another thing to go there and like show what that world is, right? And bring the world to life. So there's a lot more exploration of video. My fault, I didn't send the sizzle reel early enough, so it was taking like 60 minutes to download. But the sizzle reel kind of like shows the world a little bit more expansively. And maybe we can show it at the end. Who knows?
And so is that the future of Innovation Crush? Is that the future of...
Yeah,
Are we going to see this as a Netflix show? Are we going to see this as, is that where this ends up?
I've kind of referenced it as the Anthony Bourdain of innovation, right? Like going to people, places, and things, and like exploring not only just like, what is it, right? It's like, look, a robot, right? It's another thing to like, why are robots important in Japan, right? It's about the aging elderly population and like how that's expanding. And it's about companionship and like really understanding the cultural appetite. And then similarly to an Anthony Bourdain, he's still in the kitchen and opening restaurants and things like that. And I work with a lot of companies and startups and individuals to actually bring innovation to life. So I just want to like give it a little bit more volume in terms of what people can take away and give them a little bit more of an emotional connection to the content.
Okay. So, the first thing I wanted to start with as I was reading the book is we were talking, you use the word innovation a lot, in fact, all the time, right? And
yeah,
I feel
sorry about that, guys.
No, I feel like that's a word that is maybe for a lot of people doesn't have as much definition, right? Like we're at South by in the middle of startups, and we use words like entrepreneurship and startup and all that. How do you define innovation versus entrepreneurship versus any other ways that we might ordinarily think about it?
On the surface, at least for me, I like to think of it as a reimagination or a reinvention of a way we do something, whether it's business like you guys, even StockX, right? To some extent, it's like, hey, what if we created a stock market for sneaker culture? Like that's reinventing how like the whole ethos of commerce in online retail. So there's that. But then out of 184 episodes now, like every show interview ends with complete this phrase before I ask my guest. Innovation to me is, right? Because it is a very much internal process. Like makeup of who you are as an individual is outwardly reflected in the creative things you put out in the world. One of my favorite examples, I interviewed Miguel McKelvey, who's the CEO of WeWork. And, you know, I think the company is currently valued at $175,000 a member, right? It's like they have offices all over the world, huge real estate play. But then, you know, in talking to him, you find out that he actually grew up in sort of community living. Like his mom and her best friend lived in a house together, and they had like 5 kids amongst the two of them, and really just shared resources and, you know, meals and the whole nine. So he's developed a massive community. It's part of his DNA. So, you know, there's this human side to all this, to what actually innovation is, and it gets translated through different lenses depending on what the need is that inventor is filling.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, maybe I look at it myself, being an entrepreneur and having started to run 3 other companies, I look at it through the lens of business, right, and through the different parts of that. But there's a structure to this book that I think will be helpful to walk people through, which is there are 10 rules, right, that you've laid out on innovation. But before we go into, I know we talked about going through the rules. There were 2 passages in the intro that I wanted to bring out. So this is, I dog-eared like pages and everything. This doesn't get any more low-tech. So first of all, as an intro, because I thought this was awesome.
All right.
Chris Denson is like Chris Rock meets Chris Sacca meets Christmas. That is a good intro. I want someone to write something like that for me. Like that.
Actually, shout out to DJ Mick, who's actually DJing right now. That was his quote. He's a silly guy, DJs for Twitter and the Cleveland Cavaliers, as you probably know, and actually produced we did a mixtape for the book. So there's a mixtape available on SoundCloud and iTunes, and so yeah, that's Mick. Thanks.
I mean, that is great, right? I mean, that doesn't get any better. But part of that, and I guess for anyone who doesn't know, right, the Chris Rock part of that is because you were a comedian.
Yes, formerly known as a comedian.
I'm formerly known as a lot of things, including a lawyer and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I think this speaks to so much for startups and for everything else. So you're talking about moving from being in the corporate world to doing comedy.
Yes.
Right, and so I want to read the quote here, right? He's talking about earning an engineering degree that I didn't care about. I cared about it in the way you care about a well-crafted pair of counterfeit Air Jordans. It's like you wrote this for this interview, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I care about it in the way I cared about a well-crafted pair of counterfeit Air Jordans. Sure, they look good and everyone's impressed, but deep down inside, you know you're wearing fake sneakers.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I have many previous careers, including being a lawyer and working at big corporate jobs, and now I run startups. So, yeah. Anyway, I really just wanted to read that quote.
Yeah. I mean, I can comment on it if you like, or not. Anybody want me to comment?
Go for it.
No, I mean it's exactly that. I think I think part of the journey, especially if you're in my career, has just been like, it took me a while to understand that I really was in love with the idea of ideas, right? I didn't kind of care what the vertical was, but I had to go through like multiple, like I worked in the gaming industry, I worked in, fashion, like I worked in all these different verticals, and it wasn't the vertical per se that I was attracted to, it was the problem solving and the opportunities that it creates, so it becomes a transferable skill in any domain. But for a minute, it was, yes, I was working as an engineer, and you ask a 17-year-old kid who's a freshman in college, like what they want to do for the rest of their lives. Like, I don't know. So I made a clever decision. I got a degree in engineering that was only available at 3 schools in the country, and it's in packaging engineering. So every company that makes a product, they have to put it in a package. So I was like, I'll have a job, like job security. But at the same time, I started doing stand-up comedy in my freshman year, and I did that for 7 years. And so between those two worlds, is like one was the fake Jordans, right? And the other one was those retro 6s that I just got a couple years ago.
That you bought from StockX?
I'm sorry, but
Right, excellent.
Yeah, of course.
Good answer.
Yeah.
All right.
Receipt on me.
Last dog ear here before we go to the 10 rules, right? And I think this actually touches on a lot of rules, so we'll go into, I think, the ones that are relevant for this. So, talking about the success of comedians, and it says all comedians, basically their career turned around after they decided to be themselves, right? This idea of being, I guess, sort of, innovation crush is someone's incredibly personal experience is leveraged to create amazing ideas that the world identifies. So the idea here of being, I guess, true to yourself and doing what what you want to be doing and touching yourself. And there's some of the rules that are directly related to that, but it seems like that's also how we ended up into, for you, running Innovation Crush and crushing the box and everything else, right?
Yeah, I think even for me, it was, like having this comedic, silly side to it. A lot of friends here, thank you for coming. They know I'm silly, right? And I think that comes out in, see, Katie knows. I even say the show is a cross between Fast Company and The Daily Show. But it also took me a while career-wise to like not be afraid to be silly in a brainstorm, right? And lo and behold, like the majority of my creativity comes from like puns. So like I'll say something in the room as a joke, and then I'm like, wait a minute, that could actually work, right? And so like I was battling perception. Right? Are you the funny guy? Are you the lawyer? Are you the sneakerhead? Are you like people want to pigeonhole you, and you feel like you need to answer to that, and that kind of like fucks with your creativity. It's like, well, what do I want to do? But maybe there's value in all those sides of you, right? And so, it took me a while to embrace that and put it out.
Cool. All right. So there's 10 rules in this book. I'm gonna read off a rule.
Okay.
And we'll go through. I'll read off
and that's it?
Yeah. No, we're just going to read them 10 and then we'll go home.
Yeah, okay,
we're good.
cool.
No. I'll read a rule. And actually, all right, so as we were preparing for this, I asked, can I get a cheat sheet of what each of the rules mean so that I didn't have to read the entire book before we got here? But I think it'd be interesting to see if anyone knows, can guess what they mean.
That's fun.
Right?
Yes.
All right, and then you can then
go a live game
deeper.
show.
Yeah, a live game show. All right, so the first rule is swim like an otter. It's because this is the hard one. The first rule is swim like an otter. Anyone who hasn't read the book or know Chris have any idea what that means?
And
swim upstream? It's salmon, I think.
Upstream. Good.
Be relaxed. I've never seen an otter swim. That's maybe. Swim with the other otters? Kind of, right? Swimming on your back?
Yes, Adriana.
Use a disadvantage to your advantage, so use your bulky weight to propel.
Are otters inherently disadvantaged?
It's almost, you're offending otters right now. Oh, you want me to now?
Yeah, no, because I like.
So
this
everybody
one.
got it
This
wrong.
one's great. This one's really good, but yeah.
So I'll answer with a story.
Yeah.
I interviewed this guy named Dan Goods, who's NASA's artist in residence. He's been there for 15 years, helping craft missions. Like these engineers get in front of a room and they're pitching for 10-year-long missions, and they start speaking geek speak, and it's like, I don't know if that's the deal. Now, these engineers have to pitch, and he's been there like helping them craft those missions. But he also does a lot of converting their scientific concepts into public art exhibitions. So he's a trained artist. He's done some amazing work. And he, as we were talking, he was telling a story about in art school, his professor had him draw a picture of an otter. And he drew it, turned it in, and the professor goes like, all right, in a couple days, meet me at the pool. Showed him a video of an otter swimming and like made him get in the pool and swim like an otter. And so the chapter starts to explore this idea of empathy, right? We were creating products and services and innovations to affect a community. You damn well better understand that community to as much of a degree as possible. And so to like have a newfound sensation of what an otter is like in a pool, like to do that assignment over, it has an entirely new perspective. So it's this idea of empathy and immersion. And my personal example is, when I went to go work at Machinima, I had played like 2 video games, right? And if you guys aren't familiar with Machinima, it's like an online community for gamers and fanboys and so on and so forth. And was the poster child for YouTube success as a channel. But I didn't understand that culture well enough. So I went to VidCon, I was at Comic-Con, I went and sat in on panels and asked all the dumb questions and tried to play the games and, went to the parties and all, so to really understand the culture a little bit better.
Yep. Did you choose that as the first rule for a reason?
No.
I mean, because it seems to me, right, as reading through them, like that's, when we think about just in business in general, as starting a business, like understanding that customer and understanding the culture of that business you're creating, I mean, if you don't have that, you're pretty much got nothing, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, I read all of this through the lens of startups and business. So
Sure.
I thought that was pretty relevant. So.
Yeah, no, I'm joking, but
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think like understanding what it is you're about to embark on,
Yeah.
Especially from a customer perspective, is probably a good first step.
Yeah. All right. There's no way anyone's getting this one. All right. The second rule is eat your brain. Eat your brain. Be humble.
Sit down.
Yeah.
Be humble.
That should be a rule too.
Anybody else?
Anyone? Eat your brain.
You didn't have to leave.
I know. At least find out if you're right. Get outside of your own head.
You know less than you think.
All right. Close. So a couple of years ago here at South by, we actually did a project for the CW. There's a series called iZombie, which is, girls like has to eat little pieces of brain because she's like stuck in between the zombie world and the real world. And so she works in the morgue, and when she eats the brain, she can like see their thoughts and like help solve crimes and all that stuff. So for that project, we actually partnered with a startup called Emotive. And Emotive is like a sweatband, that's connected to a device and helps you measure calm and brain activity. And so it measures these 4 different areas of the brain. And so we kind of made it this branded experience where you could go in, like there's a giant screen like this, get your brain scanned, and then depending on like what color or what activity is happening, we gave people 3D printed pieces of brain candy that corresponded with their color or their activity, so they got to eat their own brain. And this was, for us, like it was a step toward like leveraging wearable technology to measure emotional sentiment. Is because every brand makes like an emotional promise, right? Like Snickers really satisfies, or Wells Fargo, done, we got it, don't worry about it. Although we're going to make you sign up for accounts that you don't ask for. And
they just create them. You don't sign
yeah,
up for
they just create them for you.
Uh-huh.
So this idea of eating your brain really is about experimentation. Like how do you develop a spirit of experimentation, and what are those baby steps, and then how do you just keep that going? Because we definitely experiment in year 1, to year 3. Year 20, you're like, okay, we got it, right? Like, so how do you continue to iterate and evolve and like eat your brain? Like just, do something that's a little bit crazy and, if you take it in the literal sense, but, have this sense of exploration and experimentation.
Yeah, and I think in startups and business in the beginning, it's all about iteration. You're constantly putting out new features, new products, get it out there, get feedback. Mm-hmm. But as companies get older, it becomes harder to do that at that level. So, yeah, okay. This one, I think I got this one right away. So, checkmate or knockout? Checkmate or knockout? Kill the task at hand. So, checkmate or knockout, boxing or chess? So, this is a good one. In fact, actually,
if you got it, what did you get when you got it?
Well, it is the opposite sides of the way I've read it, but your words of brains and brawn, right? That you actually have to. There's a grit part of going in there and physically doing whatever you're going to do. The smarts don't get you there, right?
Yeah.
We talk about it in my words, right? That ideas are worthless, that execution is everything, right? That anyone can come up with the ideas, and there's a lot of smart people to do that, but it's also the people that are going to get in the pit and get dirty and actually, do something as well. So.
Yeah, 100%. And shout out to King Drew. Andrew McGregor is a 6'7", 300-pound, 3-piece suit wearing chess boxer. And chess boxing is actually a sport that is really popular in London, and Andrew brought it over to the US and started to launch it here. And it's literally like you get in a ring, you make a chess move, and then you box for 3 minutes, and you literally either win by checkmate or knockout. And so the whole idea is like this idea of unlikely pairings, because those two things don't go together, right? And I think some of the best creativity in the world comes from like, oh shit, well, I didn't know they were working together. Like, what does that collaboration look like? Virgin and Adidas collaborated a couple years ago to design a spacesuit. And it's a spacesuit that I would wear on a Tuesday to work. It was actually really cool. But when you hear those two things together, it kind of like sparks a little intrigue. And yes, in the literal sense, it's that brain versus brawn. The idea is nothing. The getting it done is the hard part.
Yep, 100%. All right, become a mercenary. Become a mercenary.
I like how I can just hear the fan.
I know.
Crickets.
I think this has a lot. I mean, it's a evolution of the last idea. I think, right? When looking at it, but
Yeah.
you give your
So is it be a mercenary or become a mercenary?
become a mercenary.
Yes. So, if you think about a mercenary, like they're called into action at any given time on, any mission, and they have a ton of, tools to pull off the job. And that's kind of like being sort of this multifunctional entrepreneurial mind and like understanding multiple areas of business and creativity and culture, almost to the point of expertise. I'm sure like if we saw with Floyd Mayweather and
Conor McGregor.
Yes. Like Conor McGregor has a ton of skill sets. He couldn't beat the experts, right? He couldn't beat the expert, but he can damn sure like has a lot of skills to pull from in that ring. And so the example with this one is a guy by the name of Hakeem Oluseyi, who's the chief science officer of the Discovery Channel. A guy with 2 PhDs, grew up in the wards of Houston and Watts, and just like learned how to fight at an early age, but also was like I think we start off the chapter saying like what happens when you combine Albert Einstein and Fat Albert, because he's like, I like Fat Albert but he's like, I watch science shows all the time. And so that guy's a comedian, he's a voiceover talent, he teaches in prisons, he works for NASA, and like at any given time is like, what do you need me to do? And I think we all have that ability to a degree. And it's like knowing enough to be dangerous about certain things and knowing where to rely on an expert for
this is a startup CEO in a box, right? I mean, jack of all trades, master of none. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I've been told myself multiple times in my career that I'm essentially unhireable as a startup CEO, right? Like I don't know anything well enough to be a pure expert. I'm better than most people, but not better than anybody. Something like that.
You're better than everybody.
Right.
Than me.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. but not being a true expert in anyone, but being just good enough across the board and all that. And I think in a lot of ways, like to me, like that is 100% what a startup CEO is.
I tell a story in there of a mentor I had who was at the time when they were doing like when Biggie had mermaids in his music video and like people were spending millions of dollars on music videos. He was at the height of that. And you watch this guy on a set, and he knows how like the wattage of the lighting. He knows what kind of makeup kit to have, and he can have all these intelligent conversations in order to save budget, time, money, like resources, and bring new thinking to the table. I think also when you know enough to be dangerous and you're not an expert, you say the dumb thing, which could lead you to the next creative level. Because it's like, well, why can't we plug it in over there instead of over there? And you're like, oh, we never thought about that, right? Because it's your domain. This is the way you always do it. I'm going to ask a question that's going to jog you in a different direction. And I might be absolutely wrong. You might kick me in the teeth, or you might like, actually, that's a good thought. Like, why don't we try it?
How many total people have you interviewed through podcast, video, book, everything?
Probably over 200. I mean, I have 184 published interviews, and then events. C2 Montreal, I interviewed a dozen people, including Steve Wozniak and Miguel McKelvey and Linda Boff, the CMO of GE. So that's roughly it, about 200.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is the one we were talking about earlier. There's no way anyone's getting this. Is kick some balls. We'll just go right in and tell the story because
stand up.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. No. Poop. Got my leg up pretty high. So kick some balls is quite literal. Friend of Hatch, John Werner, is the head of innovation at Adidas. And one of the things about John, when I asked him, was like, oh, what sort of KPIs does the company keep you to? And he's like, I don't have any. Like, I was like, what? Most of us are like, there's ROI has to be put on this thing. And one of the innovations that he won at CES 2 years ago was for the connected soccer ball that Adidas had developed. And it was a ball that you could kick. It would tell you how much pressure was in your impact, what was the speed of your foot, what's the rotation of the ball, the distance, all these things, and like help train soccer players better. And they deployed it, and hopefully, soccer gets better to some degree. You start to develop super athletes because of all the information we have on their performance. But it's something about this freedom to create, right? Like they don't know when he's going to deliver something and when he's not, but usually it's something of value value. I mean, they've done regenerating treads, connected shoes that just kind of like track your mileage and, you know, steps and all those things. And then there's a converse to that. So the idea of kicking balls is like quite literal in that sense, but also just like the unbridled level of, you know, creativity you have to just sort of keep with you at all times. Because the converse of this is like what most of us have is a shitload of constraint, right? It's like, we need this in 2 weeks. You got $5,000. You know, we need to get $1 million downloads, like whatever the goals are. You're like, I don't know, but you get backed into this corner, and that's what, like, even being here at the Michigan House, that's like my favorite Detroit story. Is like, once you're backed into a corner, you have no choice but to innovate, right? You've tried everything else, and you know, so I think it's, even when you do have that constraint, it's important to keep the emotional fortitude of freedom, right? Because you don't want to panic and not do your best work, but you also want, you want to like do some cool things at the same time.
And I'll tell you, I guess the median in that for us is literally whenever we set a hard deadline on something, for whether it's for the engineering team, whether it's for they get it done. They get it done, and it gets done great. And it's when there's not a deadline. So, like, at least in my experience, there's got to be some constraint and some pressure, and not too much that you stifle that, right? But there's got to be some pressure and some deadline to just, get the adrenaline going.
And there's a balance in that. I mean, it's definitely like if you want like a managerial perspective, it's just understanding the psychology of the people that you're working with and what they need to be their best selves,
right.
And not like you get the thing? There was a funny video online of like people standing around a creative director while he's like designing something. There's like 8 people just standing around like just watching him work, and it's like it's hard to deliver your best under that sort of pressure. You're right. Like where's the balance, and that is up to the individuals involved.
Yeah, and that leads right into the next one. This one I think most people, my money is on someone in the audience getting this one. Assemble a caper crew. Assemble a caper crew. Yes, one step further.
Rob?
In his words?
I caught him mid-swallow. He's like...
This goes right into what we were just talking about in terms of your team, but it's a team for
innovation. Yeah, and you're right, like surrounding yourself with people that'll help you succeed, but also people with like very different skill sets than your own. My parallel in this chapter is like looking at like Ocean's 8 or, growing up in the 80s and the A-Team. You've got BA, you got Murdoch, you got Hannibal. Like everybody has a different weird role in a way they approach the problem and the way they want to contribute to it. And in my history, even running innovation at OMD, I mean, I've worked with writers from House of Cards, I've worked with scientists, and I mean, I've hired them to like work full time for us. And so if we're dealing with a problem for a State Farm, right, that person who worked on House of Cards is gonna be like, what if we did, and I have no idea. Shout out to Kevin Spacey, by the way. And I'm just kidding, but too soon. So
I was gonna let you run with that.
You're like, you
go
just
for
exit
it.
the stage. That guy's on his own. But no, just like making sure you're surrounding yourself with like people who have different perspectives. And we talk about it from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but I think this is more like experience. I want that person that is like a little bit nutty. And also, I find, you kind of touched on this earlier, even your unhireability, right, is like I find like there's a land of misfit toys, of people who like are highly skilled, but we can't readily recognize what the value is. Like, oh, your resume sounds awesome. I have no idea what to do with you. And even like my first chapter starts off with that, like going on interviews and trying to like consult and like, oh, you're a creative director. Like, yeah, but no. Oh, you're the technology guy. Kinda, right? Oh, you do. And so it's finding those individuals and like giving them a platform to like spread their wings and be their best creative selves.
That platform is so rare. It's so rare that actually companies have the freedom to be able to hire people like that. We've just gotten to that point. So StockX we're about 130 people right now, and we've probably had about 5 hires in the last year that we didn't really know what they were going to do. But we just really liked that person when they came in the door and said, you know what, this is a super smart person, and we'll figure out a way to use them.
Yeah.
In fact, I think there's at least one of them in the room. But it's rare, and now we actually feel we're getting to the point where we got to sort of buckle back down and get like these specific roles. So
right.
It's just really rare to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's I think it's in that chapter, but it's talking about like what percentage of your resources do you dedicate towards this experimentation or a team like this, right? It's not going to get like your full, $1 million marketing budget. Is going to be like, let's have this team continue to experiment and do things and like help us problem solve, and be explorers and bring back, like the hunter-gatherer mentality, like go out and see things and like bring them back and try to make those unlikely pairings happen.
For sure. All right, so put women in their place. I like the...
Anybody?
I like the uh-huh. What's that? Up top.
High five reference.
Although I do want to say that so before we go, so you made a comment in terms of you recommend doing away with minority and women panels.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
So she kind of got it right. She
Yeah.
said women's empowerment, and it is put like in the literal sense is put women in their place, like put them
Right.
in the mix where where they belong, and then we extrapolate from there just about diversity and inclusion in that whole conversation. So you go from diversity of thought, right, like we talk about with the scientists and the artists or whatever, into like literally like just other life experiences and vantage points, and how that actually breeds your creativity. And I was interviewed in the Drum last February, and it was like, oh, we want to profile you, and it's February. And one of the questions was, how can we do a better job of celebrating diversity? And this is in the article, and I was like, stop celebrating diversity. When you have the black panel or the women's panel, you're automatically saying that's for them, right? I was like, why not just put women on the panel? Right, it should be that's what inclusion is. It's just like they're there. It's not like it's was it the Jay-Z video where he's like I forget the name of the song, but basically the video explores like what if there were no more first black anything? What would the world look like then? And so, granted, I'm not saying we don't need a space to have conversation and dialogue and celebrate and explore and figure things out, but at the same time, it's like I think there's value in just like, I want to be the black person on the panel, but not even call it out. Like it's important to reframe what inclusion actually is versus this kind of like separation, at least by perception. Right?
So I have a very real question about that, and we're right in the middle of it, and I think it's hard for people to put some of that into action, and I'll give you an example, because we agree with everything you say 100%, right? We have 130 people. We have 50 open job recs at StockX, and
Anybody bring your resume?
that's the only reason we're at South by is recruiting people. And we struggle. I mean, it's just nonstop. That's all we do is recruit and hire, and it is sometimes hard to find one qualified candidate. We have some roles that have been open for a year. So how do you balance that with not making diversity its own? It's own issue, but to actually include it as part of it.
This is like the great debate, right?
Yeah.
Like, affirmative action, but I'm better than that. But it's just kind of this balance. There's a company I really admire called Phenomenon, and they, for every role that they have in their company, they do a minimum of 50 interviews. Right, it's that diligence and that willing to like. This may take a while,
right.
but we're going to like make sure we find every corner.
What is their business?
So Phenomenon is kind of like an innovation, creative consultancy. I was one of the 50 at one point. They didn't hire me. So, but I just admire like that approach, and it does take a little bit of deliberate intention to at least explore enough. Like sometimes that first interview, you're like, that person was great.
Yeah.
But then the third person is like, oh shit, that blew my mind. Like it's on, like that's your best bet is to like go and see how many people that you can talk to about whatever the role is or whatever that need is, because you'll find some pleasant surprises.
Yeah. These are the sort of things that we constantly talk about and are, I mean, honestly, a lot of these rules lead into a lot of the same conversations we have as we continue to build a company that is, a year ago we had 25 people, now have 130, and how you build the culture around that.
Like rapid growth is like definitely like that's
Right.
the time where you're like, we need somebody to get in here and sweep.
Right.
Like you.
Yeah, no,
Come in here.
I end up sweeping, so that's
Right.
fine.
Oh, all right.
That's
So
how-
you got
that's
that
how
job.
it goes.
That one's handled.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Death by 1,000 slaps. This has nothing to do with the prior one, right? This has nothing to do with putting women in their place. Death by 1,000
Yes.
slaps.
No, it does not.
It's just purely a coincidence.
Good. Assault and battery jokes. At the panel.
You're making Kevin Spacey jokes. What's going on?
Which is worse? No. Let's have a debate. So death by 1,000 slaps is like one slap won't kill you, right? Two, all right, 1,000, like it's gonna start hurting. And this is really for me, it was reframing the idea of failure. We talk about failure a lot. Fail hard, fail fast, fail big. And I've never at any point in my career had like that $10 million company that I lost. I didn't have some big failure, but I have a lot of micro failures. And it's like anything from those 20 unresponded to emails that you sent out, and they're like, that investor loved your idea, and you followed up, and then you followed up again, and then you followed up again. What happened? I thought you said you were gonna, or life gets in the way, a spouse gets sick, or your kid's fucking up in school, like all these different things that are kind of like start to amount to just angst and kind of disrupt in some ways the innovation flow. You begin to question yourself, like, is this the right time or the right move? Because of these little micro moments that keep eating away at, the reality of trying to make a vision happen. So even when I talk about this, like when I give a talk, I talk about this idea of excitement, right? Getting to the goosebump moment of an idea. So it was like, I'm sure you had several ideas business-wise before StockX was a thing. And there's probably a ton that are on the back burner, but this was the one that was like, yes, this is my goose. Like, I'm willing to go to bat for this because I'm genuinely like invigorated by it. And so, like, to survive those sort of micro failures that come along with the territory requires that, that level of like investment, like personal investment. And then there's like the chapter really explores, just EQ, like kind of maintaining your own like sense of peace, in that process. But yeah, so it's like death by 1,000 slaps. Like one won't kill you, one little small micro failure won't kill you, but when they happen all over and again in a short period of time, it can be pretty daunting.
What's the flip side of surviving it is knowing when that 1,000th slap is the right time to move on. It's easy to figure out when to move on when it's a big failure,
right?
And to say fail quick and move on, right? And we can say trying to survive it, but I don't know. What's the advice for trying to figure out when to drop
I don't
it?
know. It's funny. I've asked so many different guests of mine is like, when do you know when to stop and move on? Mm-hmm. Everybody's answer is it's on the individual, and I've seen horrible ideas be shepherded for years. Yep. I've seen horrible ideas be shepherded for a week or two, and like the person, they see the light of day, or the inverse of that, and I think it's up to that individual's journey. Like even for me, I talk about the point in time when my daughter was born, and I was living out of my car. And I was like, I should move back to Detroit. And this is not the time of Detroit like it is today. This is like everybody else was leaving. So, and so it was, I don't know, I even say, I was like, I don't know if it was ego, if it was, belief in whatever vision I had, that I just kept going through it. I very easily could have started over. But I think it's that individual's journey to decide for themselves, like when it's time to move on or not.
Non sequitur, it's time to move back to Detroit as we're continuing to build the city, so now you can come back.
I'm ready.
All right.
I'm ready.
Actually, the inverse of that is the next rule. So flee like a refugee. Flee like a refugee. That's a tough one.
Air conditioning.
Yeah.
So I interviewed a guy named Bassem Youssef.
By the way, that's so cool. I'm a Daily Show fan. That's so cool.
Oh yeah. I love it's so Bassem is like when Jon Stewart was hosting the Daily Show. Bassem was Jon Stewart of Egypt, and actually had more weekly viewers. I think Jon had 3 million at his peak, and Bassem had 16 million weekly viewers tuning into his show. And in Egypt, in the U.S., haha, funny. Let's make fun of the president. In Egypt, it's like, what did you say? And there's actually a documentary that was done on him. And at one point they're in the production room, and the girl walks in, talks to the team of writers and staff, and is like, "Hey guys, it's getting really bad outside. If you want to work from home today, you can." Right? That doesn't happen on Jon Stewart's crew. And after a while, Bassem started to receive not only death threats, but frivolous lawsuits. They were just trying to burn him in a sense. And so he chose to leave. He chose to like take his family, immigrate to Canada, and eventually to the U.S. like just last year. This chapter is really about risk, right? It's like how much risk are you willing to take to push forth that message, that product, that idea? And he believed in like a voice that should stand up against, you know, the atrocities that he had seen. And this is a guy who was a heart and lung surgeon and kind of just started a YouTube channel just to talk about the problems, but he also had a sense of humor. And so people started to like him. He's one of the first on YouTube in that region, and just became this massive personality, and, you know, probably one of the coolest vegans I've ever met in my life. And shout out to vegans if you're a vegan. Sorry. But yeah, so it's like this is about how much risk are you willing to take.
And that's literally at the core of every single startup, is every single entrepreneur doing that full time.
Yeah.
You know, is risk. I can't tell you how many people reach out to us and say, you know, I want to work for StockX, I want to work for a startup, but aren't willing to move from whatever city they're in to Detroit. I'm like, you're not willing to move from Detroit to New York? It's an hour flight. Like,
yep.
Yeah. All right, last one. Ruin everything. Ruin everything. I think this one's got some logical. Ruin everything.
Okay.
That's close.
That was close.
Yeah.
Good job. So one of my favorite TV shows is a show called Adam Ruins Everything. It's a guy named Adam Conover, and every week he's challenging like what we think we know about everything from weddings to shopping malls to the suburbs, and it like really breaks it down, almost like, remember the VH1 pop-up videos? Like facts will pop up. He does it in a very comedic way, like everything's almost like skit-based. And probably I think the number 3 show on the network. And so like I'd like geeked out because I literally watch this every week with my family, and it's like our time together. And it's this idea of like, what do we think we know about things, and how can we challenge our own perceptions? And part of my tattoo says, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at will begin to change. And it like Adam is an expert at doing that. That is who he is. He's like, I'm the annoying guy at the party. Be like, actually, you know, and then somebody tells you actually, and whatever they say next, you're like, really, and it starts this like debate and, you know, thought process of like, what else am I missing? How can I use that information now? You know, it's like, where are you getting your insights, and how can you actually ruin some of the things you think you know in order to build something, you know, new and amazing from scratch? Katie.
Sorry, what was the quote again that's on your tattoo?
Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at will begin to change.
So we have a really similar saying within our family of companies. I'm going to get it wrong. What is it? It's. You'll see it. You'll see it. You'll see it when you believe it.
Jesse
right?
Jackson.
Right.
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh man, we took
No,
an ism from
kidding.
Jesse Jackson. Yeah. Okay. So that's on Dan.
There's not Jesse Jackson.
But it's the same idea, right?
Right.
Exact same idea. So okay.
No, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what the Jesse Jackson thing is now. I'll remember after. Yeah, but it's exactly
Same
that.
idea.
It's this, and being in the practice of it. It's not, and I think most of these rules, hopefully, are like life rules. Like, because for me, that's my guiding principle on everything. Whether I'm upset about something somebody said, and I was like, well, am I the one, like, you know, just kind of like asking myself my own questions to challenge my own perception, you know, or even if I'm in a room with a client, I'm like, well, you know, how do you put that in a way that's softly, you know, put? And it's like, actually, have you thought about it this way, right? Like, so I think life, business, you know, social encounters, like everything, that idea of ruining it and kind of like approaching it from a different angle.
So I don't know what we have for timing, but do you want to take questions from people? Do you want to, like, I wanted to run through the rules and get your perspective on all the rules, but I don't know if
I guess now nobody will read the book. We just
Yeah. We get all the rest of the stories in there. But
by the way, it is on sale on Amazon and digital copies for 99 cents today and tomorrow.
Is today the official called the
Today
official,
this is the actual official
Yeah.
event. So thank you guys for like joining us. This has been amazing. And I wanted to do it, like I started off talking in the book about Michigan State and my experience in Detroit, and like I've been friends with the folks at the Creative Mini who put this space on for the last 2-3 years. So grateful for this opportunity too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Questions.
By the way,
yeah.
No. I was just going to say before your questions is I haven't read a book in 5 years, in 6 years since I started. You run startups, you know, time since I really had kids and startups at the same time. But I ended up getting through the first couple chapters of it, which is so.
I'm proud of you.
Yeah,
That's good.
thanks. All right.
Keep going. Keep going. You can do it. It's not on audiobook yet, so all right. Yes, sir.
Just like getting in a creative space to be able to put a body of work like what you've put out now, what is that like for you? And is a lot of it just kind of reflecting back on past experiences, things that you've seen, things that you've learned? So like, because I put out a book, right? But it's just a book of tweets, and it's like I pulled my Twitter archive from over
Right.
from over a year, right? So I actually didn't write a book. So what's that like just getting in that creative space and just reflecting on all of your experiences to put that into a body of work? What's that like for you?
That's a great question. It was, this is like 8 months of work, and I originally wanted to do like an A to Z guide, right? And shout out to the folks at Book in the Box if JT is here yet. There he is. That helped me a lot just in that process of crafting. It was like, you don't want to do that. I was like, yes, I do. Just kind of going back and forth with, that process. And eventually, I was struggling with it, and somehow like the swim like an otter thing came to me as like that could be cool. I was like, and I wonder if we could do more of those sorts of metaphors to kind of bring it to life. And then I started thinking about like, what are the lessons I've learned? I get asked a lot, especially just because of the show. Like, what is innovation? Or just exactly what James just asked. How do you get into a creative space? How do you and I took some of the questions that I had learned, and honestly, it's like you ask any documentary filmmaker, is like, that film's not done, right? Like, there's so many things that I wanted to say, or afterthoughts, or so I don't know if it's done per se, but it was sort of, and it was a fun, and even working with Book in a Box, it was they probed a lot, asked a lot of questions, and even challenged my own perspective on what I thought, how a style I wanted to tell this story in. So yeah.
My question is really about the process of reinventing yourself and kind of how you evolve. I haven't read your book, but I imagine you talk a little bit about how you have gone from kind of career opportunity and evolved. So I'm wondering if you could dig a little bit deeper into that process of reinventing yourself and talk about what's next.
Yeah, that's a good question. Also, a lot of this stuff it was like accident meets necessity. Like my career has been a weird mix of the two. Starting off with stand-up comedy, then going into comedy writing, and then into production, and then you're making things, and you're like, I know who this audience is. I think I can figure out a way to reach them, and then marketing kind of becomes what it is today, where there's 1,001 different ways to reach an audience and engage in story. And I think, kind of again, maybe touching on James' point, is looking back, it was I was always just a curious person, regardless of what sort of life circumstances I was up against. I was just curious about gaming, I knew enough about it, or I'm always jealous of journalists who get to go in these worlds that it's not native to who they are, but they just get to do it. So I think the evolution just sort of became, I had to figure out what the story was. That unhireable thing was well, how do I reframe the story? And I think the exercise of me how do I tell you who I am so that you immediately get the value in this situation? And that, and even in television and film writing, they say writing is rewriting. And even I think the same truth is pertaining to your personal story, and how you communicate that. And I think as you go through those steps, it evolves. And if, for me, at one point it was, I'm a storyteller, right? Whether it's stand-up or working with a brand or giving people an experience, it's you're engaging people in some form of story. And so how do you sum up who you are that can kind of be a plug-and-play version of yourself despite what environment you're in?
Well, and I'd argue that after reading this and hearing more, that you're not actually reinventing yourself, that it's just almost a natural progression through doing the same thing, whether it's storytelling or anything else. But it seems like it's not actually it's not a full reinvention. Yeah. It's a natural progression almost.
Yeah, it's I think it's who we all are. Tomorrow you might see something on Facebook, you're like, what is that? That's awesome. I interviewed Orlando Jones, and he said we all started off being fans of something. Right, and that's led us to who are where we are now. It's since Hakeem Olashey. I loved Albert Einstein. That suddenly he was a fan of Albert Einstein and then became, one of the #1 physicists in the world, right? But the path to get there is rocky sometimes.
Great talk so far. I'm curious, maybe not to put you on the spot, but 10 essential
Why are my
rules.
pants so tight?
10 essential rules. Maybe bonus chapter for those who actually attended today. Is there something that you can
Well, yes,
add,
there
add, add
is.
one more? I mean, people like lists, but I mean, there had to whittle it down to just 10. I mean,
Yeah, that's a great one. Yes, there is a bonus rule, and that is be dumb enough to do it anyway. Despite whatever this rule book tells you to do or not do, is like do what you're going to do anyway. Like this just becomes like information, right? You start to construct your own bits and pieces of all this stuff. There's no like immediate tell-all, rule book. But that chapter is actually the story that goes along with it is a good friend of mine named Victor Pineda, and Victor is severely handicapped. He's been in a wheelchair, uses a breathing machine. He's been in a wheelchair since he was 5 years old. This dude has a PhD from Stanford. He's a filmmaker. He was on Obama's Council for Persons with Disabilities. I had a chance to go to Nairobi with him and do a project when the laws changed surrounding persons with disabilities and civil rights violations. And so we went there and created a charter and a whole technology platform tool for reporting violations to it. But the thing is, when you travel with Victor, you double as his caretaker. So it was bathing him, make sure he's stretched at night. You're getting up 5 to 10 times a night. And I'm me and my other friend who went, Nirvan Mullock, we were to see what he does every day, and he's been to 150 countries. This dude is amazing. So it's it's cliche, but it's if he can do it, you can too. And all the rules are against him, right? Even when he phrased it, he says a disability is only relative to your environment, right? You can't jump up on the roof, so, unless you can. I don't know if you can. But you got some nice thighs. No, but if, he jumps, the disability is relative to your environment. And even when he says, I saw him being interviewed by some newscasters when we were in Nairobi, and he said, I need a wheelchair the same way you need glasses. Right, it's all relative, and so that whole idea of reframing, and he's done a ton of things he's not supposed to do. We were walking on a safari, he took his breathing machine off. I'm you sure you want to do this? Okay. So but thank you. That's great. That's the bonus chapter for those who are here.
Yeah, I think I listened to your podcast with the author of Theory of Onlyness, and I've been a quote from that episode.
Nilofer Merchant.
Yes.
Yes.
That's really stood out to me all year. You said it's our responsibility to each of us to figure out what kind of creative person we are in our ecosystem, which I thought just speaks to the kind of self-awareness and confidence it takes to discover that about yourself. But you are a really good translator in all these different spaces that you're in, and you've already mentioned all these different verticals, or going to Nairobi to write charters. You find yourself in all these really unique spaces, and I'm curious what you've learned about entering them and how to learn what the culture is quickly so that you can kind of honor it but also innovate within it.
Yeah, it's the first thing that comes to mind is shut up. I think a lot of times you want to get right to the solution, especially if you jump in and you're a perfect example when I talk about something like an otter and my time at Machinima. I'll give you a better example. Emily Chang, the CMO of Starbucks China, she just took the job, and I interviewed her 3 weeks after she got the role. Before that, she was in hospitality at intercontinental hotels in China, and she was on an 11-week, designed by Starbucks, 11-week observation. No contribution, just go around to different offices, to stores, be an observer first. And then, you start to see, you may have an idea of things you want to do, but it's like, let me just get in here and see what's going on, And even when I went to Machinima, I did something similar. It wasn't 11 weeks. It was like a day. I'm like, hey, what do you do here? Okay. But, for a long time, I wasn't like, I didn't want to, I wanted to be respectful of the culture that they had already developed, right? But also I wanted to make sure I have as much information as possible. Ask questions, observe, just notice how things operate, take notes, all whatever you got to do. But yeah, I think it's shut up is kind of like their first rule of thumb.
Hi. Do you think that your 7 years in comedy helped you with being able to navigate all the different types of people you've had to interact with in your, not new career, but your career since then? Do you think that the comedy was important to it?
As stand-up as a craft, there's nothing more brutal than getting up on a stage and trying to make people laugh. And you don't know what kind of day they've had, or if they're on a bad date, or if they heard that joke last week from somebody else, or whatever it is. If you bomb, if you can survive bombing, that is, that's key. And then it's I talk about how, you may bomb 6 nights in a row, and that 7th night when everybody's cracking up it's cathartic. It feels amazing, and that's the thing that keeps you going. The thing that keeps you going through the next 6 shows. And I think same thing with the an innovator's journey. There's so many skills from just being up on a stage, whether it's reading a room, right? I sat through a lot of pitches where and I wasn't the one pitching, but you see people dozing off, or they're not paying attention, they're on their phones. I need to figure out what's the thing that's going to get you. I'm sure we've all seen comedians go oh, you guys like the dick jokes, right? And then they start doing their dirty set, right? It's you kind of reposition, still the same person, same sort of ideas and thinking, but just they chose a different lane. But yeah, I mean the whole first chapter really starts off comparing all these different pieces, even the art of a pitch. I think we're all marketing ourselves at any given point in the day, whether you're looking for a job, you're marketing yourself, or you're you have an idea you want. We're just marketing all the time, unfortunately, right? We're connecting in the process, hopefully, but it is just understanding human beings, and I think comedians are really good observers of culture and nuances, right? It's those small nuggets of insight. It's that's why Jerry Seinfeld can do a joke about socks getting lost in the washer. It's such a subtle nuance, but for him, he built an empire off of it, right? So yeah, I hope that answers the question to a degree.
Probably got time.
The police are here.
More.
Everybody, let's go. It's true, they are here. One more question.
They're actually enjoying the conversation.
Is there one? All right.
No more questions? What is next?
You got there's another panel. You're gonna be what do you tell us about your thing? I'm gonna throw it back to you. In Detroit, there was a commercial. It was oh, what are you gonna do after high school? It's I'm gonna go home and make a sandwich. It was a mind is a terrible thing to waste. No, I think developing more in the video space. Really diving deep there. I wish I could have shown you guys a sizzle reel, and just kind of doing more of this. Not only talking about it and having conversation and dialogue with individuals, but getting in the trenches on occasion to help build ideas and to help people see things differently. So I want to live it as much as I talk about it, and I think that in there, kind of your point is there's a natural evolution that happens with that. So thank you. And he actually is hosting a panel on the technology with Dahani Jones. So stick around for that.
That was you stole my job there.
Oh, you do it again. Go ahead.
No. First of all, thank you guys so much. How about a hand for everybody for these guys?
Thank you.
And Josh, that was really good. You could.
Josh actually, look, so we got introduced about a month ago, and I was let me see who this guy is. He has a show on YouTube. He interviews all sorts of people in sneaker culture, and you even have a set. I was jealous. You have a set. I get to go in a closet with a microphone.
We have the actual desk from Sports Center. We literally, that set is the actual desk from Sports Center.
See?
Yeah.
So.
Josh, you want to give everybody a sneak preview what's going to happen here at 5 o'clock?
We're giving away free Yeezys, and after that, nothing else really matters. So, right? we literally have a big green bus that's been driving around town telling everyone we're giving away free Yeezys at 5 o'clock. So, I'm actually a little bit worried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a reason to stick around. There's food, there's drink. We're gonna have some music playing in a second, and in about 5, 7, 8 minutes, James Chapman, Tahani Jones, gonna get up here, talk a little bit about the tech hustle, and it should be another very entertaining talk. So stick around, everybody. Thanks for coming to Michigan House.